today for a very important discussion that is based around the discussion of climate change and how the climate change is impacting girls' education in Pakistan, and what could be the policy intervention so that we can mitigate the education crisis and the girls' education crisis. We have been listening a lot about climate uh, until today. So we are presenting a framework that Adil Najam has developed, that framework, that what happens when climate change, climate crisis hits the education crisis, and what happened next, and what are the next steps that we can uh, take to mitigate the education crisis as well as the climate crisis, so that both the crises we can help resolve the problems of both crises through the education and few steps from the climate. So I'll start with the presentation of Dr. Adil Najam. He will present his framework. Then we will follow up with a panel discussion who will answer several questions around the framework. So if someone can play the presentation. Thank you.
But not the response regarding virtually. Many of my colleagues from the NDRMF and other experts in education are there in presenting very much more about this, and particularly my co-author, Shahila Singh, is also there and will be able to answer specific questions. My job today is to present to you a paper, a very actually exciting work, research that I have been involved in with Shahira, in trying to think about, for the Malala Fund, in trying to think about this question of what happens if we think about the climate crisis and the girls' education crisis, or education crisis in general, together. How do they interact? Right? We clearly have a climate crisis. That's why you are at COP. We clearly have an education crisis, which is also existential, particularly a girls' education crisis because of those inequities. Right? Education is bad for everyone. It's particularly bad for the girl child in many countries, including in Pakistan. So how do those two interact? Right? And that's the paper that's the research that we were asked to do for the Malala Fund, Shahida and myself, and I want to very quickly present our framework. So we started with this question, which is or trying to think about, what happens when the climate crisis meets the girls' education crisis. And a lot of people are thinking about this, certainly about education, certainly about girls' education, but about a lot of issues, right? Health and climate, food and climate, faith and climate, certainly education and climate, and in our case, particularly girls' education and climate change. What happens when the two interact? And to try to unpack that, we looked at a lot of literature. It turns out there's much more literature than I thought there was. So we looked at what other people looking at this are saying, and we especially looked at the Pakistan case. Okay? And you will hear about this. Pakistan is important because Pakistan is at the front line of both the climate crisis as a highly vulnerable country and of the education, especially girls' education crisis. So when these two crises come together, how do they interact? Right? And to do that, we kind of unpacked it into three questions. First question is, how might climate change impact education, particularly girls' education? So when climate change happens, what does it do to education, particularly girls' education? The other side of the question, how might education, particularly girls' education, impact climate change? Right? So the other side of the coin. And finally, of course, this question of what might we do about this? Right? So those are the three questions that we set out to unpack as we try to look at what happens when the climate crisis meets the girls' education crisis. The context of this is Pakistan. The findings we have, we believe, are universal, not just for Pakistan, but for all countries. And they have to be contextualized also in what I have been calling for the last 10 years the age of adaptation. That we are now at a place in thinking about climate change where we have to think about impacts. Right? We continue mitigating because if we don't, the impacts will be greater. But we cannot afford, especially in a country like Pakistan with very low emissions but highly vulnerable, to think about it as if we are in the age of adaptation. So let me start with that, and let me start. I won't go into the climate question because you are at COP, you know we are in crisis, right? But let me show you this, and some may have seen a version of this before, but this is different. What has happened to the global temperature since we've been recording global temperature, right? So this is showing not a projection, not a future scenario, but actual recorded temperature up to this year for every month that we have recorded temperature. And you will see there that even the 1.5 line is being touched there. That doesn't mean we've come on average to 1.5 because that's a different calculation, right? But this is the surface temperature. So clearly, we are in the middle of a climate crisis. Clearly, we have to prepare for adaptation, for loss and damage, for impacts, right? I will be similarly fast with the education number because people in this room know much, much more about this than I do or will do. But here are the numbers that strike me as worth looking at, right? So what are those numbers? 23 million. Think about that. 23 million children in Pakistan are out of school. Read that again. 23 million children in Pakistan are out of school. A little over 10 million of them are boys. A little over 12 million of them are girls. Right? And right there, you start seeing the disparity. Right? You see the inequity. Right? It is bad for all children. It is particularly bad for girl children. 3.5 million is what we saw with the floods, children being displaced from education. 33%. 33% is a very important number. 33% of all girls. That means one out of every three girls who should be in school are not. Right? Again, think about this. One out of every three children in Pakistan who ought to be in school are not in school. That number for boys is 24%. Again, shows the enormity of the challenge, but also the immediacy, the urgency of the challenge. 8 years. 8 years is approximately, in broad strokes, the difference, the gap between girl and boy education in Pakistan. So whatever the numbers for boys might have been around 8 years ago, those are the numbers for girls now. So even as we improve, that gap has remained, partly because of population growth, partly because there is so much to catch up on. Right? So those are the snapshots of these two crises, and I won't go into them beyond. I hope I've demonstrated both of them are crises. Right? So as we look at these crises, what do we find? Right? So here is what, in looking at the literature, at looking at the experience from Pakistan, what we were trying to do is to come up with some sort of a framework to think about what these two crises, how they interact. And our proposition is as follows: that we adopt what we are calling the twin crisis framework, which suggests that the climate crisis is a threat multiplier for education. And education can be a solution multiplier for climate action. What that means is that, like in many things, already the threats are there to education, but they become much more acute, they become much more serious, much more difficult to deal with in the context of climate change and climate impacts. And the hope is, that's why I say can be, that education, the literature tells us, the Pakistan experience tells us, can be a solution multiplier for climate action. Right? So let me unpack. Again, I'm putting a lot of things here very, very quickly. There's a lot that's in our research and paper. I'll only give you the headlines. Right? So how is climate a threat multiplier in education? We find that there are at least three major ways, three large buckets in which climate can become a threat multiplier. The first and obvious of them, and this comes in many, many shapes, many, many dimensions, the first and obvious of them is what we call learning loss. Right? We saw this in Pakistan in the 2022 floods very clearly. We saw that even before in the COVID era, that there's a learning loss for all students. There is particularly high learning loss for poor students, and within poor students, there is very high learning loss for the girl child. right? And the learning loss happens in many ways. I'm thinking about disasters, but it also happens beyond disasters. So in disasters, my school is no longer accessible. My home is no longer accessible, right? My home was swept away. I am told with family to move somewhere else to get out of the floods way, right? So that's a clear learning loss. I may, in the most extreme cases, and we have examples of this, girls who leave school because of a disaster can find it very difficult to come back to school. The economic apparatus isn't there. Home and livelihood of parents has been lost. The parents are scared. We see an increase in incidents of early marriage for girls. Not because parents don't love them, but because for parents, that may be a way of securing the future in light of this insecurity that has happened now because of a climatic disaster. So many ways of learning loss. Those are some, but there are others too. Learning loss, even if it is not a disaster, right? When extreme heat increases, as it has, for example, in Karachi, the already unbearable learning environment in the school at extremely high temperatures becomes inhuman, unhospitable. Right? If you are having a 100-degree day after day after day, that is not an environment in which you should expect learning to happen. Right? So that learning loss, as we see climatic change on a regular basis, right? You can close the school for a day because of snow here in Boston or fog or smog in Lahore for a day or two. But now we're talking about climatic change becoming the norm. In that norm, the learning loss happens in many, many ways. Again, I've given just a few examples. Not just learning loss, but infrastructure loss. Right? One of the major points in this paper is that we need to think about education in a climate context, not just as curriculum, not just in what is being taught or who it is being taught to or who is teaching, but also as a large infrastructure place, right? Even in countries where there aren't enough schools, by far, like Pakistan, education is a large infrastructure there. There are thousands and thousands of schools. There are roads that lead to schools. There are bathrooms or not in schools, right? So infrastructure becomes a major hurdle when it is lost. Is the school still standing because of climate after climate disaster? Is the road to the school still serviceable? Right? These are very, very real things. What is the quality of the school left because of climate, its ability to deal with climate, its ability to deal with disaster, and so on and so forth? Again, lots here, just giving you the headline. The third is development loss.
So just for the interest, in the interest of time, we would like to move forward this discussion through a panel discussion so that we can discuss more about the argument and the policy options here. So I would like to introduce my colleague, Lucia Fry, who is heading the policy and research at Malala Fund. So over to you. Thank you.
Malala is always there for the girls, and we are here for the girls today. I'd like to start with a story about when I was little more than a girl myself. I spent 2 years, long ago, I'm no longer a girl, I spent 2 years in a school on the border between Namibia and Angola. Back then, the weather was already going weird. Floods, droughts, learners coming to school hungry, girls dropping out, and many other problems. Temperatures were soaring in the dry spell, leaving learners exhausted by the early afternoon and unable to study. It was a really challenging climatic context. The year was 1995, and global temperature rise above pre-industrial average was around 0.6 of 1 degree. Now it's 2023, and the global temperature rise is about double that above pre-industrial averages. I love to think of my time back in Namibia and the learners that I had there, but I sometimes wonder how the learners in that school, without aircon, without good transportation, are managing to study now when they are dealing with the effects of climate change coming at, 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial averages. And I really wonder how they will cope if temperature rises continue to 2 degrees or even higher. We're here today to talk, as Dr. Najam said, about education as climate change as a threat multiplier for girls' education. But I hope that Dr. Najam's co-author on the study will also be able to tell us about ways in which girls' education can be a solution multiplier for climate change. Let me now start by introducing my esteemed panel here today. Javed Ahmed Malik leads on future strategy, partnerships and operations in Pakistan as country director for Malala Funds program there. He formerly led the Punjab Education Sector Reforms Program at DFID, now FCDO, Pakistan. He works at the intersection of politics, markets, public policy, and media to develop new solutions and pathways. Madam Amara Naseem is a civil servant and currently working as Deputy Secretary for Ministry of the Federal Education and Professional Training in Pakistan. In her official capacity, she has worked on climate change, education, public policy, social research, and writing assignments with both public and private sector clients. Madam, you're very welcome here today. Thank you for joining us. Shayana Syed is the co-author of this great study with Dr. Najam. She's a policy communications specialist with decades-long experience of working in many different international development organizations. She's currently engaged with the World Bank and has previously worked for Malala Fund, Democracy Reporting International, Worldwide Fund for Nature, and the UN. And finally, last but by no means least, Mahnoor Rashid has recently graduated from the National Defense University. She's a climate activist and has been engaged in advocacy as part of YUNGO, which is the youth constituency for UNFCCC. And she contributed to the Global Youth Statement on Women, Gender and Adaptation. And she has also been awarded with the title of Best Delegate at the inaugural LCOY Pakistan and a delegate here today. Welcome them all. Thank you so much. I'm going to start with Shahira. Shahira, you're the co-author of this report. We heard a little bit there from Dr. Najam about the ways in which climate change is a threat multiplier for girls' education. I know you've also written about how education can be a solution multiplier. Perhaps you could say a little bit about the ways in which education is a solution multiplier and give us your reflections on what you hope governments attending COP28 should take away from your research.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Dr. Adil has already set a good context of the framework and the study that we have written, that the global climate records are being broken with a relentless regularity. Climate change is not something which is a problem for the future. It is here, and that's why we are gathered here at COP as well. It is a reality. And this problem hits close to home as well. And that's what the catastrophic floods of 2022 were for us, which led to more than 30 million people being displaced and putting almost 1/3 of the country underwater. So it's a very real problem for countries like Pakistan, which are economically marginalized as well, contribute very little to the greenhouse gas emissions, but are one of the most vulnerable countries for climate change. Dr. Adil talked about the kind of threat multiplier climate change is for education, and he talked about how there's an infrastructure loss whenever any climatic disaster happens, there's a development loss, and there's a learning loss as well. So corresponding to that, what we have done with this framework is that analyze literature and try to come up with ways on how education can be a solution for climate change. And this is the intersectionality that we are presenting in the framework as well. So number one is that education is crucial for a climate priority. It is a climate priority for us. We need to focus on education, and within education, we have to particularly focus on girls' education. If you want to deal with climate crises as a whole, without focusing on girls' education, we believe it will be incredibly difficult to do so. And the larger the gap is going to be between boys and girls' education, the more difficult and multifold the challenges are going to be. So, number one, just putting it out there is that we focus on education as a solution multiplier for climate. Now, Dr. Adil already talked about how infrastructure is the first hit whenever climate disaster strikes, and hence, corresponding to that, our solution or second recommendation is to the government, especially the Pakistani government, where the climate crisis is as integral, is to prioritize building green infrastructures. And when we talk about building green infrastructures, we are arguing that we focus particularly on green infrastructure for girls. So we build schools for girls. Um, uh, Basically, the argument really is that to build climate proofing of the buildings, and this could be done in retrofitting or building new infrastructures altogether. These infrastructures, why are we arguing that we should focus on this? Because they serve a lot of people. This is the primary mode of education. It will serve a lot of people. These will be simple buildings, and not only it will be beneficial for the climate overall, but also beneficial for education as well. And this is what Dr. Adil talked about as well, that if the temperature within the buildings is so high, then it's extremely difficult to have a conducive learning environment. And once we have these green infrastructures in place, then we can actually provide a learning environment which is conducive. So that's the second recommendation. And the third recommendation that we have clubbed together is basically for the people who are working within the education sector, and provide this as an education goal that we think about your mission partly being to create the next generation of climate managers. Um, because the reality of the situation is that our generation has basically failed to meet the target which are out there, and that has been the predominant discussion at COP here as well. So, what we can do is basically provide the green skills, inculcate the green behavior, focus on green entrepreneurship, as well as leadership of girls so that they can actually work on transformation of the society in the years to come.
Thank you. Fascinating, Jahira. Oh, thank you. Fascinating, Jahira. And I'm so glad you were able to fill in some of the optimistic and promising avenues from the research for us. I'm going to turn to Deputy Secretary Naseem now. Um, Madam Amara, your ministry was kind enough to host and participate in a number of roundtable discussions to inform this research. What did you take away from those dialogues, and how do you see your government responding to the recommendations?
Yeah, already as we have heard, and as there are many people. Thank you, Lucia. I think now you can hear me. No?
No. Do you want to come here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
it's easier. I'll ask you each because this one is
Sure.
working.
Hello, hello.
As we people were hearing about the data, as many people were telling about the challenges, and same, I'm going to take an overview about the challenges. So in Pakistan, we had many challenges, and we are struggling enough, in fact, to search, to explore different dimensions of solutions as well. For example, the country which is having population of 223 million people, so of course there was much devastation during floods, especially in Sindh and the roundabout third part of our country. that was devastated due to the floods and due to the shortage of water. That was also a big, challenge for us. And people, they migrated from one place to another place. And meanwhile, there was rainfall, big rainfall. So there were many challenges. And as you know, that there is one Malala, but in fact there are many Malalas behind here in my country. And girls, especially, they are having many challenges like mental well-being. That is the big challenge at the moment here in Pakistan, because the people who are not having, even they were hand-to-mouth people here in my country, and now they are also facing the same thing. But in fact, in addition, now there are many big challenges of mental well-being, because people, they were hand to mouth, one thing. And second thing, the girls who were going to the schools, and that was very difficult. There were many barriers in my country, but now they are suffering from all these things here in my country. And especially girls, they are facing many challenges, like if they come to their houses, those are broken. They don't have proper infrastructure. And if they wanted to go to their schools, they don't have infrastructure, because that has been devastated. Around about 36,000 schools, those were devastated here in my country. So that's why our Ministry of Education, that is struggling for all those girls who are suffering from all these things, not only girls, but in fact boys as well. So now we are working here for curriculum, for green curriculum, for green buildings, for green vocational trainings, and the teachers training. Of course, we are having scarcity of budget here, even in education, but even then we are struggling here in that meager budget. So in our country, if I go through the green curriculum, so we are having inclusion of all those things which are very beneficial for just to make our climate more green, and for Pakistan to be a more resilient, more green Pakistan. We are struggling for that. And meanwhile, if I go for that entrepreneurship, we are also introducing many green entrepreneurships here in Pakistan. That how can they have those types of, they can cope or they can overcome those challenges. So we are, of course, with the world, and we are also looking forward to the developed countries, that how they can support us for technical support, or any kind of support like financial, or even that mental support. Mentally they can be with us, so they can just have a synergy with us, so we can feel that we can go ahead with them. So Ministry of Education, that is keen observer, as well as that is doing much to overcome all these challenges. Thank you.
You stay here. I'll ask.
Okay.
In the interest of sharing the mic, I'll ask Madam Amara Nasim to answer my second question here. It's now working. Okay. Madam Amara, since I've started with you, perhaps I can ask a second question. You mentioned there an appeal for support, technical, financial, and so on. We're here at COP28. The priority is climate change, obviously. But what we know is that climate change is creating ever more demands on global funds, international resources, overseas development assistance. And that volume isn't necessarily growing. So where would you like to see education given as a priority in terms particularly of securing more finance? What priority do you think it would have, and how can we get it there?
Yeah. For example, if I go for education, so especially because that we don't have many facilities for distance education, right? So I was thinking before that if we could have those equipments, and we could have those facilities here in distance education even, so we could feel, or we could help those girls, or not only girls, I mean, to all the learners, to all the students who are living here in rural areas, right? So it means that we can go, we can make a proper setup for them if in future, because their future prediction that in future there will be much rainfall here, especially in Pakistan, and there will be more calamities. These can come here. Not only rainfall, because there are flash floods are here, and scarcity of water that is also prevailing over there, especially in Sindh. So people, they are about to migrate from their places. So we are thinking that the girls should be at their doors. I mean, education should be at their doorstep. So for that, distance education is very much necessary. So we can have some financial support to buy or to build these types of places from where we can control the schools. I mean, distance through distance education, and we can provide them equipments as well as some gadgets, as they could not break their or they could not stop their education in future, right? So I'm thinking that the distance education is the main thing here, as well as if I go for the infrastructure. So infrastructure that demands, from a different type of structure that is required here in those areas where these calamities usually they are coming. For example, in Sindh, if I see the bamboo trees, through bamboo trees they can make different types of schools. So it means infrastructure that needs also a different type of formalities. So this can also be granted by those countries who can help us, or who can help us or who can support us here in this manner.
Thank you so much. Um, Fascinating to hear about the specific priorities that you have and the demands that it places both on technical and financial capacity. Uh, I'll turn to Mahnoor now. Mahnoor, you've recently been studying, trying to learn and grow in the context of climate change. As Shahira said, we should we should offer you, my generation especially, should offer you our apology because we have not so far given you a good legacy as a young person trying to grow up within planetary boundaries. We've seen climate change becoming, education and climate change being linked more and more. But from your perspective as a learner and an activist, what challenges do you think climate change creates for education? And what gives you hope for a new approach in the future?
Thank you, Lucia. Um, Climate change has essentially cast a shadow on every aspect of our lives. Am I audible? Okay. So it has cast a shadow on almost every aspect of our lives, but its impacts have essentially been unevenly distributed. So we are right now speaking about girls' education. So one of the variable is gender here, but another important variable is the socioeconomic class, the underprivileged, the people, the girls coming from the underserved regions in the country. So when talking about the impacts climate change has had over them, is that essentially um, it has disrupted the learning systems for them. I would take an example from my experience with the Citizens Foundation. So we were going to teach grade 4 and 3rd students living in a slum area, and the the streets were so narrow that almost only two people could cross that street at one time. And it was a rainy season, it was essentially monsoon. And what happened was that the sewage system overflowed. And what I observed was that during those days, day 2, day 3, and day 4, every day the number of students almost reduced to 4 and 5 students. And when I asked them the reason that why were they not showing up, one of the reasons was that they were not feeling well, they were ill because of that overflowing of the sewage system that was caused because of the increased monsoon, but also because of the lack of the development infrastructure there. So, in terms of that, the underserved communities are suffering more, and climate change has had unequal impacts. Another important issue here is that the curriculum is outdated. It is not essentially catering to the needs of the present in terms of giving them the education, giving the students the education that would equip them with the skills, but also with a sense of urgency to act right now and to become the, the main actors to carry on the climate action. And another thing that is important to mention here is the lack of the training of teachers. So they are unable to incorporate the right kind of education into their, course curriculum. Third thing that I want to talk about is Dr. Adil Najam also mentioned this was the financial strains. Uh, this is one of the issues that it creates is that obviously the infrastructure is destroyed. So the finances that were supposed to go towards giving them a better education are now being spent upon creating new infrastructure, replacing it or repairing it. And another important thing is that the families now, for the families, education has now dropped down on the priority list. So now they have to sustain their life, they have to ensure food, their shelter, and stuff like that. So now education is no more a priority. Uh, Coupling these all impacts is the psychological impact that is basically multiplied due to climate change. So now the loss of infrastructure, their homes, and seeing even the loss of lives and the loss of food and shelter essentially put so much stress on the students that they are unable to, carry out normally with their studies. And then displacement is a major issue because they have now lost access to whatever education they had. So now they are obviously, resorting to other means of sustaining their lives. Um, Climate change, unfortunately, is in some ways, to some extent, also aiding to strengthening the patriarchal structures. So what happens is that when a family gets displaced because of a climate disaster, uh, while they might have been giving access to education to their girls, but now when they have displaced due to the security reasons and obviously due to the conservative society that we are living in, the access of girls education has now become even more difficult. So this way it also strengthens those patriarchal structures. The hope that I have, well, being a part of Youngo and the Action for Climate Empowerment Group, we have recently been pushing for, getting finances on the table for climate education. Unfortunately, we did not succeed, but we are still pushing. So what I want to say here is that global collaboration is really important for the youth to basically, go beyond the barriers of the state, the boundaries, and connect with people all around the world and push for the change that they want to see. Another important a factor here is that we youth have a better sense of urgency because we hold a stake in the present and in the future, and we are we not only represent ourselves, but we also represent the future generations. So if we are able to organize, mobilize, and fund this youth and their initiatives, I believe that this would be a huge turnaround and would aid in our climate action and our journey towards climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahnoor. And I'm so happy that you finished on a hopeful note, even though you gave an eloquent account, really, of the ways in which climate change intensifies pre existing inequalities and adds some new ones to the mix. But you left us with a message of a hope, and you left us with a call for climate justice. I'm now going to turn to Javed. Multi-sectoral partnerships, collaborations of the kind that Mahnoor just referred to are really important. The study, as you've seen, really confirms what we probably knew from observation, the strong linkages between climate change and girls' education. Within those linkages, what do you see are the priority areas that civil society could focus on to solve education problems, and then hopefully with the onward effect of helping to solve climate change?
Thank you very much. I think in Pakistan, civil society has been at the forefront of raising the game on environmental and climate change and debate. Dr. Abdul Qayyum is here. STPI since early 90s actually have been at the forefront of this battle. And I think education civil society is slightly late because the linkages were not very clear. And we who work in the education sector, we always thought this is just a periphery issue. This is just an issue which is not concerned with us. But now, um, for some time, and typically this Dr. Adil Najam's and Shahira's paper establishes that the linkages are far more actually clear. And therefore, it becomes our responsibility in the civil society to work at multiple levels. The first is, and since you're sitting in climate change ministry's pavilion, and very thankful to them for this opportunity, I think Pakistan last year played a crucial role in shaping as G77 leader to kind of initiate the concept of lost and damaged fund, which actually this year was approved. I think it's very important now for global civil society and for local civil society to really shape that, what it actually means to program that loss and damage fund in education sector. And that's actually fundamentally important, and the new ideas would come out. So therefore, there's a lot of kind of engagement is needed on creating new knowledge and new partnerships. That's the first thing. The second thing is I kept thinking about Adil's concept of solution multiplier of education. But if you want to be a solution multiplier, it actually in Pakistan or countries like Pakistan, Global South, I mean, just consider the implementation capacity of the state is extremely limited. I mean, in this floods alone, Lucia, Pakistan, the 22,000 schools were submerged in Sindh. And if you want to construct one school through government procurement system, it takes you 6 years. So when I met the Chief Minister Sindh Murad Ali Shah that time, I said that look, you won't be, you will lose a generation of children if you rely upon your own procurement system. You need to come up with new ways of kind of constructing school through private sector. What I want to say is that these solution multipliers won't become solutions unless you don't really pay good attention to prevailing system of governance, in which, for example, how the budgets are made and implemented and how the budget cycle, works. So that's the second thing, that the civil society, the think tanks, and the government, really sit together and realistically think that what we need to do to actually make it a reality in which, for example, the third message is that, and it's actually quite clear from the paper also, that you don't need kind of awfully high tech solutions to fight climate change in education. I mean, you are focusing on essentially learning poverty, you're focusing on making sure children could learn better. And you know that out of, for example, the total school year, you now have increasingly, typically 3 to 4 months, extremely hot in Sindh and South Punjab and Balochistan. So you don't have to start your day, learning day at 9 o'clock, right? At 8:30. You can actually, the sun rises at 5 o'clock. You can start it pretty early so that actually you have good chances of 4 to 5 hours good solid learning, as opposed to kind of, certainly 10 o'clock onward it becomes extremely warm. Even in April, May, in places like Rajanpur or in Dera Bukti, it becomes quite difficult to do that. So my point is, I mean, there should be a realism to it. I mean, this particular battle is ours. Loss and damage fund is only $300 to $400 million, and madam, the money won't be coming and flowing in. It would be important for us, the money which we have already could be spent well. And now that money, it would be important for CSOs, for private sector, for the government also to work together on this. The last thing I would say, that in terms of the discourse is widened now. For the last 20 years, education debate is limited to access, quality, and governance. The new dynamic now is, most of these countries like us, are environmentally fragile. You have disasters after every 2 years. You'll have kind of these disruptions, COVID, floods, earthquakes. The question now is how to make your education system resilient to these changes. I mean, there should be no surprises. It should be planning in advance. It should be kind of already an argument and a variable, that how you would be able to respond to it. And by doing so, I mean that you need to work at school level, you need to work at district level, you need to work at the provincial level. The trouble is most of the developing countries' governments are very highly centralized, and they really don't like local governments. So unless you don't really bring that in, you won't have a fundamental shift in the way you want to manage services. So I'll just stop here by arguing that there are 3 to 4 key areas which actually civil society can pick up and really contribute with the government to actually respond to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Javed. Um, Shahira talked a little bit um, about the research that that she and Dr. Najam have undertaken and highlighted for us some of the propositions going forward. Um, However, this is a relatively new field. Do you see a need for more research? What research would you suggest academics, think tanks, NGOs should pursue in terms of broadening the knowledge base for effective climate action within education?
A two-word answer to that would be absolutely yes, because this is, like you said, a relatively new area. And echoing on what Javed said as well, that traditionally speaking, we're used to seeing climate at one side and education at the other. And these are usually considered to be silos. But from the Pakistan's experience, as well as developing countries like Pakistan, which are disproportionately affected by climate change, we are realizing how interconnected both of these two thematic areas are. And the reality of the situation is that you cannot talk about education, particularly girls' education, unless and until you also talk about climate. And this is a thinking that we are also bringing in with this study as well, that the solutions actually exist in the space between these two thematic areas and how they interact with each other. We have argued that they majorly interact in these three areas of infrastructure, development, and learning losses, as well as corresponding to this, these are the three solution multipliers. But these are not the only three ways that these two thematic areas interact. And this is perhaps where more research can come in. This is a preliminary framework. We have to add specificity to it, because without that, this wouldn't turn into concrete policy action. It would be just a theory, just a paper. And if you want to actually materialize that into policy actions for specific stakeholders, unless and until we do that, this would be one additional just framework which exists. So what does that look like when we're talking about green infrastructure, specifically in the context of Pakistan? Javas have talked about how difficult it is to actually establish an infrastructure in the first place, but we're not just talking about any infrastructure, but resilient infrastructure. So we don't have to keep on rebuilding them time and time again. Um, when you talk about green skills, what does that look like in a localized indigenous context for Pakistan? When we talk about behavior shift, what does that look like for us specifically? And I want to prefix that by saying that while these solutions that we are presenting targeted towards the Pakistani audience for the Pakistani government as well as other stakeholders, we have to take into consideration that this is not a Pakistani problem alone. This is truly a global and planetary problem to begin with. Um, the climate emissions of the global north are disproportionately more than the global south. So I also think that it is slightly, if not more, unjust if we bear the entire burden of fixing the climate crisis on girls who are in the rural areas in Sindh and Balochistan. It would be a very unjust argument. So while we say that we have to inculcate green behavior, green skills, promote activism like you were talking about, but at the same time, we have to creatively think about how to unlock the funds, like the Loss and Development Fund, which is recently created. How do we ensure that it trickles down to the people who are the most impacted, and not just gets lost in the bureaucratic hurdles that we know exist in the international financial institutions. And this is where I think more research would come in, where it is more directed towards specific recommendations for various policy actors, so that the framework that we are presenting actually amounts to concrete policy actions for all.
Just Lucia, I mean, the Save the Children and Global Partner for Education yesterday launched a paper, actually, probably today, Rewired conference, that they are coming up with a framework in which you could actually do financing. And it's broadly, the papers are written separately, but broadly the line of argument is now more towards, as Shahida mentioned, how to approach the solution. So I think it's all coming up now. So I just wanted to mention because that's also a relevant paper, which in this particular study also launched.
If I may just add, like one last point, I was just reading a report earlier. World Bank launched a recent report earlier this week, in which they did large amount of surveys on what do the citizens actually think about climate and how concerned they are. And the findings, as intuitive as they are, were that the more educated you are, the more concerned you are about the climate. But what I found interesting in that is that even if you're really concerned about the climate, it doesn't necessarily translate into climate green behavior. So I think this is the kind of like the other side of the argument and the spectrum that we have to focus on. That is not just the awareness raising campaigns, so people know what to do. Does that actually shift the behaviors of the people, not just like in the urban centers, but in the rural settings as well? And how do we bring about that behavioral shift? And like I said before, it starts with the global north, but the global south will also join in.
Thank you. And I'm glad to see a strong red thread of justice and understanding the historical origins of the climate crisis and therefore uh, the respective responsibilities of different parts of the world. Back to Javad now.
There's a question here, maybe you want to.
Sorry?
There was a question here.
Ah, okay. I was just going to finish and take your
Okay,
question.
all right.
Do you want to ask your question now? Okay.
Okay.
But just one more question
I
really
thought
after
that,
this.
yeah.
Javed, Shahira mentioned important ways in which the content and process of education can contribute to creating the conditions both for individual behavior change, but also green transformation, and indeed for fostering a spirit of activism and can-do-ness in young people. Your program has been working closely with the Education Ministry to promote STEAM education, and STEAM education is often cited as an important element in the building of green skills. Could you give us a bit of some takeaways from this research and whether you see it having any implications for the ways in which STEAM education should evolve and develop in an era of climate change?
So, STEAM education is a government program which is basically integrating science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and art in high schools. And Malala Fund, with the Ministry of Federal Education, ma'am is sitting here. We're running a policy unit inside the Federal Ministry, a policy unit inside in Karachi, in Sindh, with Sindh government, and with Gilgit Baltistan, pretty quickly actually with Punjab as well. So, I mean, our aim is that eventually impact the way science is taught in 13,000 public sector high schools across the country, typically focusing on girls because they should have new science aspirations and kind of leadership in science. So that's essentially gender and science and aspiring to be new leaders is part of this entire thing. So actually, to be honest with you, we were not deliberately thinking about environment and STEAM kind of linkages to begin with. It's just that with we sitting in the ministry now with this new emphasis, with the leadership already here, it will become possible now to start new conversations on how to actually work on some rapid gains. I mean, the intuitive thinking is, and Manur mentioned about the curriculum as well. But with due respect, I really don't agree that just curriculum is a starting point because curriculum takes roughly 3 to 5 years to kind of change the curriculum and another 8 years to kind of change into books, right? So it's really maybe 10 to 12 years. The solution multipliers which Adil Nazam presents are relatively actually rapid gains can be really made. And that means that rapid adjustment, sitting with the ministries, looking at the learning year, whether we can make some adjustments in the time frames, whether, for example, in behavioral terms also we can link children to some, environmental projects also. We already are, for example, mobilize science ambassadors who come and work for 1 hour in schools. Now we'll be deliberately working, identifying new science ambassadors with a lot of these new young people like Uzma and others who are working in environment, asking them to come to schools and talking to children. I mean, in a low cost manner, we even are inviting gardeners, for example, sitting with children, telling them how, for example, plants and others work. So my point is that our approach is not, I mean, we know that we are a resource stressed country. Our approach in public sector is not to come up with parallel work streams and very expensive solutions. Within existing kind of frameworks, we would try to integrate many of these concepts. The opportunity is that ministry is open, very enterprising, and willing to kind of work with new partners. And it would be quite actually possible that as Malala Fund is gearing towards post-election conference on girls' education, where we want to kind of give a new deal to girls with the new government, we would try to come up with extremely, I mean, some new initiatives also inside STEAM, specifically on climate change.
Tha- Thank you, Javed. And before I'm going to turn to the floor for questions in just 1 minute, but I want to give the mic back to Mahnur. Um, Mahnur, one thing that gives me hope uh, in the midst of this crisis is the fact that youth have really found their voice on this issue of climate change, and they are slowly demanding and getting respect from policymakers and power holders. Um, do you think that the policymakers and power holders are listening? And do you think that they are ready to take the actions that you are demanding of them?
Okay, that's a tricky question. Uh, we have tried on a global level. Let me talk about Yango. So at Yango, we created this global youth statement, and it was basically a statement that is based upon like across 18 thematic sections, and we got contributions from a youth from over 150 countries and almost 750,000 individual contributions. So it was a really rich uh, statement based upon the UN language sent to the country delegations, each country delegation that which they were supposed to be aware of and have read. So now, what we did was that we asked them here at COP, sitting in the negotiations as younger representatives, that what have you done and what are you going to do across these 18 thematic sections. And if, for example, a country maybe is not aware of our demands, we can actually hold them accountable for it. So taking that on national level, I believe there is still a huge gap that exists because for example, mobilizing the youth in order to bridging the gap between the youth and the stakeholders and the policymakers, there's still a lot that we've got to do in terms of that. And if we are able to do it, for example, in terms of organizing policy discussions, consultations with the youth, we might be able to include more youth inclusive policies, and the youth might be able to hold the governments accountable for the commitments that they have made. So yeah, on national level, there's still a lot to do, but on regional level, there is a huge opportunity because we have been mobilizing with countries that are in the same region. For example, the youth from Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. We, come together and design our demands and our policies, and also mobilize the youth in our countries. So what we can do at local level, because this is a global issue, but it requires local action. Unfortunately, the global leaders are the ones who are making decisions, but still we have a lot of power at the local level. So yeah.
Yeah, and wonderful hearing about the transnational links that activism in these spaces is helping to foster, because I think truly the youth have a lot more in common with the world that they are inheriting, and can find common cause and a unified voice to call on the powers that be to act. And I guess that's what Malala Fund is all about. Um, we're now at the end of the panel discussion. Just right at the end, I'll ask each of you to give me a 1 minute last reflection. But we have a few minutes now to hear questions from the floor. So I've certainly seen one young woman here who would like to ask a question. Can you hold the mic quite close to your mouth?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fiza Hamid Khan, and I'm from Fatma Jinnah Women University, Rawalpindi. I came here with the Pakistani Ministry as a youth delegate. I'm really glad to be here and participate in this entire reformative process. But the question that has been clicking with me, and especially with listening to this panel over here, was that, and even Lucy asked that question. I'm going to be more specific with this. Speaking of Pakistan, Pakistan is a pseudo-democratic state. It's not a pure democratic state. So you do not have the right kind of democracy, democratic processes over there, the way through which we can engage the youth in decision-making processes. Right? There's a lack of access points for youth into the decision-making process. You mentioned educating the youth, and that would help in mobilizing them. True, agree, because I believe in that myself. But the problem is, only mobilizing the youth would not do much. We need reforms on the decision-making platform as well, so that these youth can be heard in the policy making. We write researches, we give recommendations, we're doing tons of work, we're speaking on this thing, but it is heard on a very minute level. What do you think is the solution for this? Education, perfect, but that is not going to be the 100% solution for the problem. There is other things that needs to be done. What do you suggest we should do?
That's a question for Shahira, I
I'm,
think.
I'm just wondering if you would like to add in terms of, do you think that the Pakistani government structures have been responsive? And if, like, from your personal experience, do you think they've been receptive? I think she would be better placed to, and then Amara can actually chip in.
So, um, I mean, co-op in my city competitions were a source for us youth to come here and to have access to these people for the first time in our lives. Otherwise, it's usually really difficult for us. There's a long way to go. I believe that this youth inclusion into every department, into every ministry, into every institution needs to be institutionalized in the form of policies, or and obviously the civil society as well. In in every department, this needs to be done, and there's a huge way, I believe, journey that we have to cover in terms of that. I do not believe that um, yet we are on that that point where I can say that yes, youth is a part of these these processes, but I hope that we are going to achieve that someday. I mean, we have taken this step. We are here right now through this, what the ministry enabled us. But yeah, let's see where we will go with this. Yeah.
I mean, I think Amara can just like comment on that, but what I personally believe is that youth can act as a very important and integral pressure group, like any other pressure group. Media is one. That's another. Civil society is another. Youth as a constituency, because the voices are so important, can act as a credible as well as a consistent pressure group to steer the government in the direction and nudge them in the right direction. And then public voices, citizen voices always play a critical role when we talk about activism in particular, whether it's climate activism. And a lot of gains that we have actually made have come as a result of different stakeholders getting their voices heard. Not to say that the path is easy, of course it's not, especially not in a country like Pakistan. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. Are we on the right track? Yes. Does more need to be done? Absolutely. And ma'am, Amara can actually add to this.
First thing I say, people are listening to you because I know that you people are feeling that we are unheard, but we are not having pseudo democratic, state here. In fact, you know that before this there was ban on students' union, right? But now there is no more ban. So it means now we can hear your voice, and we will welcome you people that if you give some suggestion even for green curriculum, for green infrastructure, for green entrepreneurship, even, or for teachers training material. If you give some suggestions, even I saw my little girl that she was making some pictures. I asked her that why are you making these types of pictures. She said, Mama, because there were some fish, these were died here on the beach. Our teacher said that bring some solutions. So I'm making the picture, right? It means that even the little children, they are not unheard. And I hope that now you people will be playing much effectively and efficiently here in Pakistan, because now there is no more ban here on your students union. So inshallah, in future, our youth will not be unheard.
I think the debate around elite capture and inequality is at the heart of this. I mean, what Ms. Khan is saying. I mean, Pakistan recently, this book by Rosita Armitage on Pakistan 1%, which actually the entire democracy, the entire entrepreneurship, entire activism even happens in that 1% clique, right? So I think it's actually quite important for us to listen young people who actually are questioning essentially the power structures that they are not heard. I tell you that I talk to bureaucrats often, and I think that they're probably not really fully trained how to work with young people because their procurement system, the mindset. If a young person come in and you ask a question, they say, "I don't have any power to solve your problem," but the young person needs solution. He doesn't need ESTA code or your kind of. They need a new. So therefore, we need a completely new approach towards governance because we have 65% people under the age of 35, right? So it would be important for us to shift and being more responsive, listening to them, and tackling inequality also, bringing this at the heart of climate change debate.
Thank you, Javed. I have another question here. Okay, Phil, bring the mic for you.
So myself, Usma Yaqub, I'm heading an organization called Forum for Dignity Initiatives. Many of you already know me and my work. So my question is when we talk about girls' education and climate crisis, we do understand that the menstruation and puberty burden is already a lot on girls that lead to school drop-off, early marriages, child marriages. So climate crisis actually doubles the burden on girls. So how mindful are policymakers, including the Ministry of Education, Climate Ministry, funders, to consider such a policy that also addresses and intersect with climate crisis and its erasure of young girls, especially because now we see with changing food patterns, with more of fertilizers, we see like the puberty age is shifting like very down to age. Like now girls start menstruating from age 9, in some cases 10. So how mindful are policymakers on this aspect of climate crisis? Because we see a big no when we talk about menstruation health and hygiene, when we talk about child marriages, bringing this education to schools along with the climate education. So I would be very interested to know your take on that. Thank you.
Amara, I'm going to put you in the hot seat to ask this one, answer this one first.
I think the first answer that is with you, because you are also working with the Ministry of Education. So it means now that we are here on that platform where we are taking help or support from you guys, right? And as well as there is mental well-being for the girls and the foundational learning hub we have established. So this is also, that is the part of it. That is the component of it that we are going to conduct many awareness sessions, as well as some as you are talking about different things, sanitation or the requirements which the regarding early puberty or these types of things with especially girls. So these are also to be handled here in the foundational learning hub, because that is the base, right, where we are conducting many different awareness sessions, and as well as we are providing different videos, and through different videos as well as different sessions, we are making them aware that what they have to do and how they have to do. And teachers especially, they are trained now, and we are also conducting more sessions to train the teachers that where they have to aware the girls here in early age, that what they have to do. And especially, this is the we are living here in Islamabad, and after 18th amendment, I mean the provincial government, that is solely that is responsible for their education. But even then, here in Sindh, we have conducted some awareness sessions, especially in rural areas where the girls were facing different problems after flood and after COVID, even because there were different types of challenges among girls. And while that you are also supporting us for this special struggle, right? So it means that we are also adding different things in our curriculum. As Javed sir, he was talking about that the curriculum usually that takes too much time, like 7 8 years. But we have taken a short type of an initiative, and that is what that we are providing them some supplementary material. And that supplementary material is the addition where they get information instantly here about all these things which are the recent challenges which they are facing, right? So we are also adding some supplementary material for them with their textbooks, right? As well as we are also giving them I mean the teachers, they are also to be trained now, and they are getting training here on the same path about which we are talking, right? So it means that we are taking some initiatives as you are asking, and you are the live support and the live example that you are supporting Ministry of Education.
Anybody else want to come in with an additional observation on that one? I've got one more question here, and then that will be our last question, and we'll close from there.
Thank you, sir. Hello, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Mehtab Kamal from extreme north of Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan. Okay, as you all talked about making the climate struggle inclusive, including gender and girls there more prominently. Okay, here I am witnessing one of the regions of Gilgit-Baltistan, where it's composed of two districts, where girls are trapped in a house, even they are unable to go to their schools or colleges. They are trapped in social complexities. So how we can expect them to think out of box and come here with to work for a global issue like climate change? How what are the what this Malala Fund and other ministries have done yet to them, and probably this may be happening in other part of the country and whole in the global south as well. So what the Ministry of Climate Change or the these whole organization have done yet, and what you are going to do in the future? Thank you very much.
As far as there is concern of Gilgit Baltistan, there is BEX, I think, that is working over there. So BEX that is especially coping with all these challenges. And I think, and I had some examples even, there were some success stories about the girls, and these were related to the GB here, about GB girls. So those girls, those were given awareness, but rather than that, those girls, in fact, parents, they were given that type of awareness sessions. And out of school children, and look at the success stories here in that chapter. So that is the live example, even that BEX, they have done a lot here in Gilgit Baltistan. And that's why even I can see that the literacy rate of Gilgit Baltistan, especially in Skardu, I think that is 100%. So it means Hunza, right, Hunza. So it means still there are of course some gaps. There are some areas here in GB where we have to work, and our BEX, these types of I think institutions, they are doing very well here in GB, right? But of course, inshallah, in future, this is the start, and this is the start, and we have to go ahead with all these policies which you are talking about, and inshallah, we will be doing our work.
Yeah, no, I mean, we Gilgit-Baltistan, we were also part of the Bani Sahib, who was the chief secretary. His kind of drive to promote education, we supported in the career festival. We also are providing support to kind of policy support to a range of initiatives in Gilgit-Baltistan, and we want to sustain that. Malala Fund generally, I mean, we are a small player, but we want to be helpful and we want to become kind of, that an intermediary between government and the young people and trying to kind of help you to promote your voices. And whatever programs we have, it have a very strong youth orientation. And very happy to brief you after the event, provide you my contact, ask my staff to meet you or myself meet you. So we're always happy to see you.
Any final words from our other two panelists? If you can give us 30 seconds of your any key takeaways from the session, any calls to action for our audience here today.
I don't know if it'll be 30 seconds, but I'll try to be brief. I think the gist of the argument that we are making in this study and the framework that we are presenting is really how crises actually feed off on each other, how they multiply each other. And we're truly living in this age of adaptation. And we cannot talk about one crisis without the other. And this is particularly relevant when you talk about climate change and girls' education. If you want to improve girls' education, we have to and we must talk about climate. And when we're talking about solutions, we have to look at solutions which are not only good for education, but also for climate. And this is probably the most optimistic thing that we can do when we know that the resource pot is actually much smaller, and we have the constraints within which we actually live in.
So, since we are talking about education and specifically that too for like girls, um, I would just add this one thing that not just education, meaningful education is crucial for us to create a better, generation that is ready to tackle the issue of climate change. So when I say meaningful education, it means that we need to teach them the green skills and the green, prepare them for the market that is going to come in the future, and obviously make our policies and our education system more gender responsive. And about the curriculum, since I said that we need to have a better curriculum, if it takes us 11 to 12 years to only generate a curriculum, we need to think upon why is that so slow. We need to change the system then if that is an issue. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That concludes our panel discussion there. I love the ending with a call for urgency and getting on with it. If there's a final thought I'd like to leave you with, it's that we've heard a lot here today about the impacts on girls, about the multiplier effect of climate change on pre-existing inequalities and the new ones that it creates. We've also heard about some of the solutions, especially solutions that girls and youth can lead themselves. But what I want us all to remember as we go about our deliberations today is that ultimately girls just deserve to be girls. They deserve to play, they deserve to learn, they deserve to spend time with their families, they deserve to make friendships, and they deserve to thrive. So let's be careful not to put them in a pocket of victim or a pocket of savior, but remember that all of our actions, all of our recommendations should be done with the goal of allowing girls to just be girls.
And I just wanted to also thank the Ministry of Environment for providing us space to talk here. They've done a lot of work in past few days. It's not easy. Thank you for being accessible and so helpful. Also wanted to also thank Akif Sattar, my colleague, who was at the heart of pulling this off. So all the best for everybody. And thank you, government, to be able to make it finally. And Minister Saab have also, he's reached here, but he is not well, but he sent his goodwill and full support to the session. So thank you very much. Thank you.
And please join me in thanking our panel today and our co-hosts, the Pakistan Pavilion. Thank you so much. Go well. Sorry? Oh, photo. Yeah.